So the Vikings pulled off an improbable victory. Let's talk about what that means moving forward here on Purple Process. Credit goes where credit is due, and the Minnesota Vikings pulled off a pretty amazing and unexpected victory against the San Francisco 49ers last night that many of us did not see coming, except some of you diehard fans out there. And kudos to you for your predictions on the Vikings being able to pull off the upset. The San Francisco 49ers were favored by 7 points heading into Minnesota. The Vikings coming into the game were 2-4, coming off a somewhat or not even somewhat, a very underwhelming victory against the Chicago Bears. San Francisco seemed like they were going to be pissed off coming off the loss to the Cleveland Browns. They're going to come into Minnesota and theoretically or mostly end the Viking season, but the Vikings had other plans and showing quite the resilience and being able to bounce back. The defense, I would say, first put off a great performance in limiting the San Francisco 49ers from being able to put points on the board of their high-powered offense. They were missing Deebo Samuel and Trent Williams, but still the defense played exceptionally well. Daniil Hunter got another sack. Cam Bynum looked incredibly good. That's starting to look like a really good, nice young piece for the Vikings for the future at the safety position where they seem to be loaded. And then on the offensive side of the ball, there was I think 3 plays in when Kirk Cousins threw the pass to Jordan Addison, which it seemed like Jordan Addison lost, that battle coming off lost the route coming off the line, but Kirk decided to trust him and throw it in there anyway. And it was wrestled away by Ward. It seemed like, oh no, here we go again with another early game turnover, but the Vikings were able to bounce back from that. Jordan Addison was able to bounce back in a huge way and had a huge game, scored 2 touchdowns. TJ Hawkinson seemed to bounce back from what he was before. All those, you're saying that he was a massive bust of a signing. Maybe feeling a little bit differently this morning as I tried to tell you over the last few weeks that, just give him a little bit of patience. He's still got the talent that, he had when we traded for him last year. And guys like Brandon Powell showing up. Cam Akers had a good game. Kirk Cousins, he had a fantastic game. He threw, that first interception, and there was an interception he probably should have had Jordan Addison not ripped it away. But other than that, those 2 plays, he played exceptionally. And the offensive line against that vaunted San Francisco defense did not allow a single sack. And, that's something we've been talking about on Purple Process for the last few weeks, is that this offensive line is in a great spot than what it has been in years past and is mostly fixed. I mean, look at guys like Christian Darrisaw, who's the number 1 rated offensive lineman across the board on Pro Football Focus. And then you have Brian O'Neill, who I think is the 6th rated tackle. They put on a masterclass against Nick Bosa and San Francisco defensive line. And then even the interior offensive line, Garrett Bradbury played well. Ed Ingram and Dalton Reisner had okay games, but just Dalton Reisner's first game, in a while, so he might be shaking off the rust a little bit. But overall, that unit did not allow a single sack against San Francisco. And if you'd have told me that, I would not have believed it. So, the offensive line is really coming on as a strength for this Minnesota Vikings team. It's something that they can count on moving forward. And so, where we were, even last week, we were talking about where things were after that Chicago Bears game. I was making an argument that the Vikings should trade Daniil Hunter, fully expecting that after that San Francisco 49ers game, like most people, that the Vikings would be staring at 2-5, with their chances at a postseason berth, really low and the odds stacked against them. Now that the Vikings are sitting at 3-4, heading against a very winnable game against Green Bay Packers next week, I think that the calculus probably internally at TCO Performance Center has probably changed significantly. I think that you're looking at, we have a number of, free agents that we're going to be walking in March. You have, guys like, excuse me, uh, like Ezra Cleveland, like Daniil Hunter, like KJ Osborne, like Jordan Hicks, all those players I think where I was labeling as potential pieces that could be moved at the trade deadline, all because they're on expiring contracts up until this point. Jordan Hicks is 32 and they have Brian Asamoah and Ivan Pace Jr. So you don't think that Jordan Hicks might be, back next year. He could be if he continues playing well, but they have guys that they seem to want to groom below him. Ezra Cleveland, I got a little back and forth with a few people on Twitter this past week discussing Ezra Cleveland, where they signed Dalton Reisner, who played pretty well this week. We've heard from Darren Wolfson of Score North, and talking about how he's heard that there hasn't been any trade dialogue, or not trade dialogue, any extension dialogue behind the scenes with Ezra Cleveland, and that they have the replacement right there on the roster. I actually predicted on Twitter a few weeks ago that Ezra Cleveland would be traded before the deadline. I actually don't know that I'm going to walk away from that prediction. We still have a week to go. The fact that they have a replacement in Dalton Reisner on the roster and they have some good depth in the interior offense line behind them, that is still a piece that they could move on from and not affect anything that they're doing, even with Ezra Cleveland playing well this year. And you take a guy like KJ Osborne, the fact that you have Jordan Addison, appearing like a wide receiver 1B type player behind Justin Jefferson probably means that they're not going to give KJ Osborne a significant extension heading to the offseason. So you look at just start with those three guys: KJ Osborne, Ezra Cleveland, Jordan Hicks, all playing decently well this year. All could have value. All highly unlikely, at least in my opinion, to be back next year. Those are the type of guys in which you flip because you can't count on getting those comp pick backs for them, especially if you plan on signing anyone at all in free agency in March. They'll cancel it out. So the only real opportunity to get picks back for them would be to make trades, now. So I still don't know if I would fully rule out, trades for Ezra Cleveland or KJ Osborne. I think Jordan Hicks is an every down player. And so there's, at this point, unless they lose horrifically next week against Green Bay, they're probably going to hold on to Jordan Hicks for, a playoff run. And we'll get to that in a second. But both Ezra Cleveland and KJ Osborne, I think, based upon their play and that there might be some placements on the roster, I could still see them potentially looking at making a move, but I think it's a lot less likely than it was just 24 hours ago. Then, the big elephant in the room is Daniil Hunter. And so, he's still, after last night's game, he's in the first place in sacks for the entire year. He's an incredible player. He's a longtime Viking. I don't want to see him go. I guess this is the one thing I failed to add last week when we were talking about why the Vikings should, trade Daniil Hunter, is that he's a legacy Vikings player that has played in a ton of big games, has had great performances. It would be sad to see him go. I think a lot of fans are right to want to hold on to him as being a cornerstone of a defense that played well last night. But the whole point, the whole impetus of this is that Daniil Hunter he has as part of that revised contract he signed with the Vikings, he has a no tag clause on that contract. So he's going to hit free agency unabridged by, I think, March 11th of next year is the legal tampering period. And he's going to listen to all the offers that are available to him. He'd be stupid not to. I mean, even if he wanted to go back to the Vikings, and he's someone that's looking to capitalize how much money he's going to make, why would you not listen to other offers from other teams and try to drive up the price that the Vikings are going to have to pay, who have avoided paying you a long-term contract coming from here. And then there's a limit on those negotiations. So the Vikings, or Daniil Hunter's contract with the Vikings is set to void on March 17th, I believe it is. And so the Vikings will have to either sign Daniil Hunter to an extension before that period of time, or all of his dead cap money that was going to come on the Vikings books for next year. I think it's over roughly about $10 million. would accumulate on the 2024 salary cap. So if they want any chance of taking Danielle Hunter's dead cap money and pushing that towards the future by signing him to an extension, they have to do it before his contract voids. And so, it really sets up a situation in which there's kind of a tight window for the Vikings to be able to re-sign Danielle Hunter, get him on the books, and especially when he wants to pursue open free agency and see what other teams have to offer him, because he's looking for that one last big contract before the end of his career. So all those factors combined, I think, makes it a difficult proposition for the Vikings to actually hold on to Danielle Hunter moving forward. So because of that, if you think it's a possibility that he might walk, that's why it was such a consideration that you might trade him for the trade deadline. Because of those factors, and I think that Kwesi understands that, I still think it is the smallest. It's almost nearly impossible, but the smallest possibility if the Vikings did get an offer they couldn't refuse, let's say like a first round pick for Danielle Hunter, they could still make that move. That being said, I think that this team also has a chance to put together a streak of wins that could put them in the hunt for a playoff berth. But if you're Kwesi Mensah and you're the Vikings and you're sitting there and you're really trying to assess, does this 2023 Vikings team have a shot at competing for a Super Bowl? Some might say, yes, you beat San Francisco 49ers. They're a Super Bowl contender last night. That shows that the Vikings can play with anyone. They had close losses to the Chiefs, to the Eagles. They should be right there in competition. But I tend to think that the Vikings are not set up to actually contend in late January, and being able to put together a string of runs a string of wins on the road against some of these high caliber NFC teams. That I think it'd be very difficult for them to actually contend this year. If you're being honest with yourself, if you're Kwesi Mensah and you're in the front office and you're talking to the Wilfs, and if Mark Wilf went to Kwesi and said, do you think that we're actually have possibility to contend this year, and should we trade Danielle Hunter? I think the honest answer is no, we cannot contend this year. And if we're getting a high draft pick, like a first round pick that can alter, the franchise moving forward, you still have to consider it. I know that'd be extremely unpopular with fans right now, but you got to be thinking about not just letting your emotions from one game alter your probably multi-year timeline that you set out with the Vikings. And so you really have to consider what's best for our long-term future. And so I don't rule it out completely, but it would have to be quite the offer, which the Vikings would be the significant winner, like a first round pick, for them to even consider it at this point. But overall, I think Ezra Cleveland is a distinct possibility of trade, but I'm not really expecting anything beyond that. I doubt that offer comes in for Danielle Hunter. So what we're looking at for the rest of the season is, can the Vikings go on a run? They have, I think we've seen on Twitter and other places today, their next 6 opponents are really winnable games. The toughest opponent on that schedule right now is Atlanta Falcons, and I don't think anyone is really terrified of them and Desmond Ridder. And then the last 4 games of the season, you play the Bengals, the Lions twice, and the Packers. And the Bengals and the 2 Lions games definitely look tough on paper, but there's a possibility that the Vikings could make the playoffs, either 9-8, 10-7. But really, where exactly does that lead, and are they really going to be as strong to be a contender? I think the next few weeks will really be able to play that out. I think the Vikings definitely lived up to their potential last night against the 49ers, and even probably left some on the bone. But have they proven that they can be a consistent performer game in, game out? And so this year so far, I would say that inconsistency has been their calling card, that they've been able to drive the ball and then they'd fumble, or they would, have a few great drives and then just suddenly sputter sometime in the third quarter. And so last night that they were able to, overcome some of those issues and be able to move the ball when they needed to put the game away. But until that they can show some consistency and beat the teams that they're supposed to beat, the win last night could all be for naught. And really, if they won last night and let's say they beat Green Bay and they decide not to move pieces at the deadline, and then they realize, few weeks after that, if they stumble a little bit and have some losses and end up, 8-9 or 9-8, missing the playoffs, we're really going to look back at the San Francisco 49ers game and say, was it all worth it? Was would we be better off, instead of being, 8-9, 9-8, and picking, 17th to 20th in the draft, if we had around a top 10 pick, had we, stumbled a little bit against San Francisco, would we be better off? I know some, I definitely know the arguments want the Vikings to succeed no matter what, and they want to be able to rally back, and they think that winning is important to culture. And I definitely don't dismiss that. But, when you're potentially looking at, drafting, I think everyone agreed that the stars are aligning for this next April to be the year that the Vikings take their next franchise quarterback, bearing a, at this point, somewhat unexpected Kirk Cousins extension. If that were to be the case, setting yourself up to have your choice of who to take a quarterback, or at least be in the window to be able to trade up to get a guy, that you want, is advantageous. So, at this point, I think that we're looking at, can the Vikings go on the run? Can they take advantage of this opportunity that this upset has given them? Can they do continue to do the unexpected and take what was the start of a disastrous season and turn it into something? I think that's something we'd all be excited to see. But at the same time, how does this rest of the season unfold that impacts the broader future? That I think the Vikings, when heading into this year, we're thinking, okay, what are those next steps, and how can we really transition this team to be a true contender in 2024, 2025, and not really expecting much in 2023, which is why they moved on from all those veterans and those deals and kind of reset the salary cap. They expected this to be a slight rebuilding year. And so now that, they have an opportunity to make a run, how much are their plans going to change, and how is that going to impact the future? So, as always with the Vikings, the big picture is a little bit muddy, and they remain at a crossroads. The San Francisco 49ers game was definitely an unexpected turn of events for them, and it'll be interesting to see the long-term consequences of, how, that even going that specific play, that Jordan Addison interception snatch that he had, they took for a touchdown, how that one little play impacted the outcome of that game, and how the San Francisco 49ers game might, change the fortune of them, maybe deciding not to trade assets, at the trade deadline. And then, they didn't trade assets at the deadline. So now they're going into the rest of the season, have a more competitive roster, and they're competing for, playoff berth. And Justin Jefferson might come back sooner than later. And, their potential of possibly earning a top 10 pick might turn into, pick 20 or something like that. How does that affect their ability to, get their franchise quarterback? There are a ton of questions to be asked here about, just how last night's game impacted the future of the Vikings. And I can't wait to come with you to figure out, what exactly that means, how to break down, what are the different paths they can go down. But this next week will be interesting. I think they really need to beat Green Bay to completely silence all those trade rumors. And if they can't beat Green Bay, and they have a really disappointing loss against that somewhat miserable Packers team, there's going to be really some hard, difficult questions come trade deadline on October 31st of how much do you really believe in this team to be able to make an impact this year, and what advantage can you give yourself by making some moves next week? Or they blew the doors off the Packers and a bad team, and it's full steam ahead about how the Vikings can, turn this year into a competing year, unexpectedly. But either way, I'm very excited to see it all unfold with you guys. A lot to consider, a lot of big picture things at stake for the Vikings. And I can't wait to come back each week and talk to you guys about how that happens and what happens next. So before we go, I want to thank our sponsors. That's Badass Wood Art. I think I saw that he was working on some awesome projects, including that Jordan Addison, Michael Jordan-esque shrug after he stole that touchdown. So go ahead and check that out. Eastside Jiu-Jitsu, and then, of course, Lake Monster Brewing. I'll catch you guys next week, next Tuesday, trade deadline day, and then we'll cover what happened that day, maybe talk about some things around the league that might have potentially impacted the Vikings if the Vikings end up making any moves. But then from there, it'll all be about the future. Who's performing, well, who might deserve a contract extension, how Kirk Cousins' play might impact his future. Where the future is at different positions, all that. There's still, even with once we get past the trade deadline, there'll be some exciting things to talk about. So can't wait for you to join me. And with that, Nick Miller signing off for Purple Process and Climbing the Pocket. Thank you guys for checking in, and I will see you guys next week.